Reg here, and welcome to another episode of Food for Thought.
This is a world.
This is a world premiere.
This is a world.
I am hoping that this is the last video that I'm going to be making on the subject of Gazi Kodzo. However, I continue to get very passionate, very emotional responses from several of the viewers on the channel about Gazi. And not only are these comments about Gazi, but they're comments that have a common thread, and that common thread is that so-labeled blacks in the US really have no reason to be angry about existing oppressive systems like white supremacy. They certainly don't see Gazi Kodzo of having any historical basis or justification for his criticism of white people, and that basically any reaction to Gazi Kodzo that isn't just outrage means that you're a supporter of Gazi and that you're a racist. So, okay, I am going to concede. Let's say that Gazi is a racist, right? So he's a black nationalist, he is a black separatist, and these are groups that even the Southern Poverty Law Center have labeled as hate groups. So there are those who might even call Gazi, who have called Gazi, the Black Hitler, which to me is, again, a little bit ironic, because if Gazi is Black Hitler, does that actually mean that white people should be seen as the Jews? And what does that mean in terms of the history and experience that Jewish people have in the United States? Often, as the targets of hatred of, Christians who are, white. So that to me is like one of the first questions, is like, what does Gazi's identity as a Black Hitler, where does that place white people as the targets of his hatred? Does that mean that somehow now white people should be seen as victims of his hatred or his movement in the same way that Jews were in the Holocaust? Now, also another thing that I find very ironic in calling out Gazi as the Black Hitler is that there actually is a so-called white Hitler in Rocky Sahida, who is the chairperson of the American Nazi Party. And now the American Nazi Party is one of, the 21 or more distinct factions of the Neo-Nazis, and the Neo-Nazis borrow elements from the Nazi doctrine, including militant nationalism, fascism, anti-Semitism, racism, xenophobia, and homophobia. All right, so the Neo-Nazis, a group, very well known. So how are people who are looking at Gazi, how are they also directing efforts to diminishing the power and influence of groups like the Neo-Nazis? How are folks who are directing energy towards diminishing the power and quieting the voice of someone like Gazi Kodzo and the Uhuru movement? How are they directing their energy towards doing that same thing with groups like the Ku Klux Klan, which has, over 28 chapters? It's an organization that has, still has, profound impact, profound influence, specifically in southern states. Now, white nationalists, of which there are over 66 groups, have a political ideology that advocates for a racial definition of the national identity for Americans that would be white, as opposed to having a national identity in the United States that is multicultural. You also have the racist skinheads, of which there are 22 operating chapters, and many of these chapters are also affiliated with white nationalist group. Finally, I'm going to name the Neo-Confederates, that are a group, and the reason I bring up the Neo-Confederates specifically is a lot of folks who have been talking about Gazi and have been directing their, kind of negative energy towards me talk about how blacks have this kind of see themselves as victims. Well, the Neo-Confederates, they actually portray the southern United States as victims of war crimes and constitutional violations by Abraham Lincoln, the northern United States, and the Union armies. So I just want to point out that, again, I understand that there is energy and enthusiasm to really silence, quiet these voices of hate that are resounding, specifically in their presence on YouTube. And I certainly appreciate folks that see racism as a cause for outrage and for directing some of that energy towards someone like Gazi Kodzo, who, again, as a black separatist, a black nationalist, is part of groups that have been labeled hate groups. But if that is the only outrage that you have, if the only outrage that you have against racism is when you see it being directed at so-called white people, doesn't that make you racist? Especially when there are so many. I've just listed, several groups, 6 different groups operating in the United States that collectively have over 100 chapters operating in the United States. Wouldn't it make sense for you to direct some of that energy towards those groups if indeed you are not solely being racially motivated and outraged because the particular flavor of racism that you're experiencing is coming from a so-called black person? So that's it for this video. Like it if you like it, comment, share, subscribe. This is Reg signing off. Love yourself. Peace.
And I love myself.